Real substance. Yes, so that's brilliant. Okay. Just a quick breakdown of what I'm going to touch upon. So I'm talking about safeguarding and inclusion and the various different elements that dovetail with that. So political, people, power, transparency, social justice, all of the sort of things that have already been covered today. I'm kind of coming at things from a slightly different perspective and an on the edge perspective, but I will talk a little bit about that shortly. But first, I personally would like to make an apology. I was raised in a conservative Christian environment, and I used to think that being gay was a sin. And I am so sorry for the harm that I caused holding that view and my actions that led from that. And I know there was harm. I know there was. I am really thankful for the excellent queer theologians and liberation theology, which enabled me to learn better. I'm grateful for the multitude of voices campaigning for change across faith organisations, not just church, not just Christianity. I am here today because I want to be the best ally that I can be and support in amplifying the voices of those who have much more interesting things to say than I do, but perhaps I'm a more accessible voice to start from. I hope that my contribution today will be to this end. So what changed for me? Well, I met my one true love when I was 18 years old at university. We married at 21 and I looked like a child in dress up. We both had good professional careers, had our first child at 24, and I thought I had achieved peak good Christian girl. I had another child at 27. Things started to slip by 28, falling apart disastrously by 29. Good Christian girls do not get divorced. I will not go into details, but it was a very, very dark time in my life, and everything I thought I knew, everything I had been taught, was utterly shattered. So by 30, I was a single mother of 2 small children on benefits and holding down a small part-time job running activities in a care home. My family was in Tyneside, yay. I was in Yorkshire, still a bit yay. My life was starting anew, and this time I had the opportunity to choose my own direction. Following the good Christian girl roadmap had not worked. So what now? I found myself almost adopted by a fellow school mum, and by extension welcomed to her church. But this raised a new issue for me. Should I join this church, I would be expected to remain single and celibate as a divorcee. Remarriage was frowned upon unless widowed, as we've spoken about. I was only 30, come on. My divorce appeared to now be an unforgivable sin. Yet my freedom was so blessed and joyous, if challenging. I could not reconcile the two. So this was the frayed edge that unravelled everything. You know, when you've got a loose thread on a jumper and you pull. And it led to my eventual deconstruction of everything that I had thought was absolute truth. Is sin an act, or is it a state of being? My act of divorce was completed and I had been forgiven through faith. Therefore, why not remarry? If a state of being, why was escaping an unhappy marriage to be my true self sinful? Why could a convicted murderer be rehabilitated and reclaim their salvation, yet if I remarried, I would be ostracised? All of these thoughts whizzing round my head with no clear answer at all. So I was spurred on to seek the truth, the real truth this time. So from the starting point of conservative evangelical teachings, I wandered into the Twitterverse when it was good. Oh, do we miss those days? And found a world of incredible teaching from Rachel Held Evans, Nadia Bowles-Weber, Richard Rohr. Undivided by Vicky Beeching, I read and cried. Matt Nightingale and Kevin Garcia over in America, Naked Pastor, his cartoons are amazing. The list went on. And all of these people had so much more to teach me of God's unfailing love, expansive love, love of our full beings as God made us. A beautiful rainbow spectrum of life. I love spectrums too. I was shown a new way and I just wanted to soak it all in. So I began blogging, which, long story short, ultimately cost me the church community that I was in at the time. I then found Dave Lucas. I don't know how many of you know of the Ordinary Office before today. Dave Lucas, who started it all off, who died almost a year ago, very, very sadly. So we came together, basically, over our shared heritage. He was from Jarrah, just up the river. And basically, I became the driving force behind the Ordinary Office developing from a disability-focused organisation to a space embracing inclusion beyond that remit. I discovered my own place on the autistic spectrum, and I became one of those who needed access requirements through long COVID, which I still live with. I have supported queer Christians to embrace their identities and find love. I have spent hours counselling those harmed by unsafe church practices. I have let love lead me to the places where I am needed. And I have become the voice I wish I had heard as a 16-year-old facing the world woefully unequipped for what was ahead. There is so much more, but that's me in a nutshell, and we've got more interesting things to talk about. So, made safe. How can we make you, me, us safe within church? I deliberately chose made safe for the title of this talk, as safeguarding is something that everyone must be an active part of for it to work. Becoming a safe environment is not just something that just happens, that other people have responsibility for, or that is an assumed given. Safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. It is an active process and it can never be taken for granted. But what does safeguarding mean? It is one of those terms which covers so many bases. It's thrown around all over the place. And it's always prudent to ensure that all parties in any conversation are working to the same definition, the same understanding. So for the purposes of this talk, I want to draw attention to the statutory definition of safeguarding, which is presented in the Future of Church Safeguarding Report, otherwise known as J. In Annex C of that report, it states, the Care Act 2014 sets out the legal duty to protect and safeguard vulnerable people over the age of 18. The duty to safeguard an adult applies where an adult, and then B, is experiencing or is at risk of abuse or neglect. There's separate legislation for children. This is for adults for now. So let me be very clear on where I stand on this. Any individual who identifies as somewhere on the LGBTQIA+ spectrum comes under this definition for me. My evidence for this statement includes the documented homophobia and transphobia present through the failed LLF process, the Evangelical Alliance's suite of pastoral resources on the subject. If you want, feel free, you don't have to. The current documented position of welcoming but not condoning in place within the Catholic Church. I could go on, but you get the picture. Therefore, it is a legal requirement under the Care Act 2014 for anyone over the age of 18 to be safeguarded from the risk of abuse present within churches on the basis of their sexuality or gender. This is not a polite request. This is written in the law. This is also a long way from where we are now. So I came face to face with this issue in 2019. Oh, should do that, shouldn't I? There we go. I came face to face with this issue in 2019 when I was part of the leadership team for a women's ministry series. There was a group within the church who did not like the gendered groups offered, as the women's series had some speakers that some of the gentlemen wanted to hear. And the men's group drank beer, which some women wanted to do. Fair enough. But within this conversation, I became actually really challenged. What would we do if a trans woman walked into the room? So my answer was simple: welcome her as I would everybody else. But I knew if I broached that subject with the rest of the leadership team across the church, the answer would not be so clear. There would be obfuscation, procrastination, ostrich syndrome. The hope would be it would just never happen and then we wouldn't have to deal with it. I wasn't happy with that. If we want to follow Jesus' teachings of radical love, we have to get out of our own way. We have to tear down the walls of complications that we build around ourselves to give a false sense of security. We just have to get on with it and love. However, that wouldn't start with me modelling the bare minimum of welcome should we be blessed by a trans woman in our midst. It must start with conversations, not ignoring that we have this huge problem with inclusion in our churches, physically, spiritually, and practically. Before we can do anything to make spaces safe, we have to recognise that they are not first. So if anything illustrates this, it is the response to Friday's announcement of the new Archbishop of Canterbury designate, Bishop Sarah. I couldn't not go there. It would have been a bit of an elephant in the room if I didn't. I'm just quite pleased I hadn't finished this talk until Saturday. Thank you. Within seconds, literally seconds, of the announcement on social media, I screenshotted comments such as, "So the Archbishop of Canterbury is not a Christian. This sobbing, weak-limbed, open borders fanatic is now the Archbishop of Canterbury." And above a post reflecting on the Black Lives Matter movement in the wake of George Floyd's death, a comment, "The next Archbishop of Canterbury, I already don't like her." Remember, this is seconds. Yet some people had already trawled old posts and started highlighting how woke she is. Or perhaps they were already prepared, ready to, just click away. As the day went on, amidst real concerns around Bishop Sarah's safeguarding record, of which there are, the overarching complaints continued to be such as the See of Canterbury remains vacant, to the Church of England has fallen into heresy, to this is the beginning of the end, people. Because a woman has been appointed to a ministry that some people think she should not be eligible for. Let us talk about some of her questionable decisions in the handling of very public safeguarding matters. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about her enabling of HTB abuse and discrimination within her diocese. Let's talk about that. Let us consider if she has learned better and will do better. For goodness, her sex and or gender should have absolutely nothing to do with it. And whatever you think on the validity or wisdom of her appointment, bearing in mind what Helen's already spoken to us about the microaggressions that Bishop Sarah has spoken about, I do think she's been very brave. Time will tell. I think the sheer number of people who have engaged with the ordinary office over the years is a testament to how unsafe our faith spaces and communities are. Thousands and thousands of people follow our social media channels. Hundreds have directly communicated with us in one way, shape, or form. The common thread is that they have been harmed by people within the church, discriminated against, abused, made to feel unwelcome due to who they are, made to feel like an inconvenience or a troublemaker. Ring any bells? It certainly does with me. The church has let these people down, sometimes repeatedly. I myself am a church leaver with no intention at all of putting myself back in the position to experience further harm. Although, never say never. I assert that safeguarding and inclusion go together like two strands of a braid. And as we know, a cord of 3 strands is stronger than 2. With the third strand of God at the centre, however we experience God, what strength and beauty could we weave into our church, into our society, with those 3 strands? Jane Reeves, in her book Safeguarding the Stranger, points out that welcoming those who are othered by society is indeed a political act, a radical act. In today's climate, where hate is whipped up into a frenzy by clickbait, rage baiting, I'm reliably told by my 17-year-old, canny political figures who knows who behind the digital scenes, to refuse hate in your heart and to choose love is to be an activist taking an action. It may not be on the level of being arrestable at a protest, but it can be just as meaningful. It is not easy. After all, safeguarding comes at a cost. But as Jarell so beautifully said this morning, we expect a cost. Rosie Harper and Alan Wilson, in their outstanding book, To Heal and Not to Hurt, outline the need for a positive duty of care, an active approach, not a passive one. If we know harm is happening, we cannot sit by and not rock the boat just because we might be comfortable in it. We may be sipping mimosas on the sun deck, but our siblings may be stuck scrubbing the day heads and wondering when it will be their turn to see the sun. It is our responsibility to recognise when we haven't seen our siblings for a while, seek out what their needs are, and intervene should it be needed. There are plenty of mimosas to go around in the kingdom of God. In 2010, blogger and author Rachel Held Evans published a letter to the North American Church as part of the 8th Letter Project. If you don't know what that is, people were invited to write a letter as if from Revelation, so 7 churches in Revelation, and this was the 8th. In it, she called for bigger banqueting tables. Her imagery is engaging. When you banquet with someone, you are all in. You are sharing the space, the food, the drink, the conversation, all of it. You are not just giving to the poor and walking away. You are not just tolerating the person at the table across from you, hoping that they'll go away in a minute. If we apply this imagery to our topic of inclusion and safeguarding, every person at the banqueting table is being fed. In order to receive that food, they are entering a social contract. All guests are seated equally, and often the head of the table is left empty as a sign of respect. All guests are responsible for maintaining the atmosphere of the feast. We don't want arguments or fights breaking out, ruining the party. Forgive me for my pronunciation here, but in Judaism, Haknasat Orchim is a mitzvah, which is a covenant. What you have, if it is needed, you share. Guests at our table take only what is needed and share the rest. We don't fill our pockets like some people do at all-you-can-eat buffets, making sure that we are okay, but ignoring the needs of everybody else. At our banqueting table, we all share our stories, perspectives, and lives. We learn from each other, gain understanding of what it is to exist in a different paradigm to our own. Our stories will have highlights and low times, stories of grace and companionship alongside betrayal and abandonment. No one comes through life unscathed. But ultimately, in this coming together of diverse strangers as equals, everyone comes through enriched if we are open to it. And what is it to be open to changing our mindset if not a political act against our current societal trend of being told what to think? So we live in a society where othering has become commonplace. We must all identify ourselves and others by binary labels: working, non-working, citizen, immigrant, man, woman. But the world does not work like that. We may not always understand the nuances of another person's lived experience, but we must respect it. Nadia Bolz-Weber writes interestingly on this topic of her experiences welcoming people into her Denver church, House for All Sinners and Saints. Now, this church grew for a heart of serving the addicts, the homeless, the people that normal churches would perhaps not welcome as they should. So following the growth of popularity of this church, more people started to join that were outside of that original demographic. Bolz-Weber had to recognise her own prejudice in fighting to preserve her original community, embrace the gifts that a more diverse congregation could bring, and crucially, pastor the church community into graceful inclusion of accepting normative people alongside the non-conforming people. Her story is the opposite of what is often found in churches, where the traditional becomes the other and the alternative is the norm. What a gift to see how the same problem plays out, whatever the demographics are, enabling us to lean into our shared commonality rather than entrench ourselves across lines of societal norms. In Good Friday People, Sheila Cassidy points out the transformational power of just being with people, whoever they are. In my music therapy practice, this is a core value. By being in music together, we can make something which explores our capabilities, draws us together, and takes us on a journey towards fulfillment. Cassidy explores this theme through conversation. By being with people, we can gain a better understanding of their lives, needs, the gap between their reality and the abundant life that we are all promised. Once we have this deeper understanding, we cannot help but be convicted to make a difference and to enable change. Durham University released a report last month in which it gave recommendations to the church following the Soul Survivor scandal. It's well worth a read. Point 3 states the church needs to develop a culture where the identification of God's work is seen as a shared endeavour in which everyone's voice matters. I ask, how can this happen if some voices aren't even present? I have learned more, developed my theology and faith more since I stepped outside of traditional church and gave myself permission to explore. So many stories are shared by those who grew up within purity culture, found their own lived experience at odds with the expectations of them, and had to go through deconstruction of everything they knew before reconstructing what they actually believed for themselves. And it's a really hard journey, and I'm still on it. But it's well worth doing. Powerful memoirs like Vicky Beeching's Undivided, which describes her rise to fame as a worship leader, went over to America, and then her fall from favour instantly once she came out as gay. There are so many resources out there. And I do mourn the loss of Twitter as a vibrant platform to connect everybody. But you can still find resources if you look. I will say, though, if any green belters in the room, I think there might be a couple of green belters around, but if you haven't come across Flamey Grant, who is an American Christian drag queen, she is well worth a look on YouTube. When it comes to God and power, the normal rules just don't apply. And that's a quote from Bear Grylls, of all people. Except we let them. We, as participants in the church, whatever that looks like, let the institutions hold all the power while the magic happens on the margins. The time is coming when the marginal must move to the mainstream. When woke becomes welcome. When we find a way to say no more to the power held in back rooms at Lambeth Palace and take power back into our own hands. When we use safeguarding to protect the institution, we are obeying Mammon. When we use safeguarding to enable inclusion, we are obeying God. Just going to have a quick drink. Okay. Transparency. So, author and journalist Lamorna Ash undertook a course exploring the Christian faith from a conservative evangelical perspective. You know the like. After her experience, she wrote, and this really got me, in this version of Christianity, it felt like there was harm stitched into the other side of its welcome. It resonated so much with me. I have experienced so many times as a student, all those years ago, on Taster Sundays while exploring churches following my divorce. You get that effusive welcome, which often includes theological glass ceilings. You are so very welcome, but you can't minister here if you've got boobs. We're so glad to see you, but you cannot be around our children with those arm tattoos. Could you please just cover them up? Please do come again, or not if you insist on holding hands with your same-sex partner during the sermon, no less. Transparency is one of the core safeguarding values, and in my opinion, the most vital in our cause at the moment. Should a vicar and a PCC agree that they wish to run their church along certain theological lines, within the broad Church of Anglicanism and the UK freedom of religion or belief, they absolutely have that right to. But please, please, put a sign up visibly in the entrance or on your website, so those of us who don't want to stitch our faith into such cloth can keep ourselves from harm. My local parish church has absolutely no indication when you walk into it or when you view the online content that it does not accept the ministry of women, unless you're in the know and you know what the Sea of Beverley is. But how many people do? My work is not valued within that setting. Therefore, despite believing wholeheartedly in parish ministry as a principle, I cannot access it nor promote it in reality. I cannot raise my daughter within an institution that tells her she is less, and I will not. She is anything but, trust me. Telling a child one thing in the world and another in their spiritual home is highly, highly problematic. In fact, the aforementioned UK freedom of religion and belief guidelines clearly state women should enjoy equal recognition, notwithstanding that religious traditions may dictate otherwise. Hang on. The Church of England, established church of the country, enables parishes to reject the ministry of women, yet the same country's guidelines indicate that this is not correct. One for another conference, perhaps. But the point remains, I am no better than you. You are no better than me. I once worked with a young man in my music therapy who was on probation following a struggle with anger issues, and therefore, one thing led to another. What he taught me musically was comparable to a good few sessions with my prim and proper A-level music teacher. It opened up a whole new world. St. Paul's famous line from Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, underscores that the kingdom of God is about equality, not hierarchy. I wonder how the slave owners within those early gatherings felt about being told that they were equal to their property. I wonder how many followed Jesus' example and washed the feet of those beneath them as they came together in worship. Did they pay lip service to equality by worshipping together in humility and then pulling rank as soon as they walked out of the door? I often return to this drawing that my son did at age 9. So we have a spider worshipping with a fly next to it. We have some blobs. We have an alien. I think that's a blob with a hat on, and then definitely a dinosaur at the far side. There's a cat. I don't think there's a mouse anywhere oversight, but there we go. There is somebody at the lectern. There is somebody at the table. The person going blah, blah, blah in front of the organ, the worship team, that is me. and all welcome. And I just love it. I love it. His perspective of what church should be inspires me still. But how many of us have churches, and not with aliens and dinosaurs, of course, but whose inclusion and welcome looks like that? Okay. Social justice. Who in those early churches had the power to enable equality? Everyone, actually. Yes, there were mega fights about circumcision, food, Team Peter or Team Paul. But ultimately, every individual had the power to get on with the business of loving each other as Jesus had taught. What has changed? Well, fundamentally nothing. Our institutional arguments no longer rage around physical covenants or leadership teams, but they do rage around spiritual covenants and theological teams. Instead of putting the immense privilege and power that the Church of England has into challenging austerity, raising fairer welfare policies, or tackling child poverty, energy is invested in gatekeeping traditional conservative values and fighting change. Why? Did Jesus himself not challenge religious authoritarianism and specifically call us to help those less privileged than ourselves? I watch General Synod, I watch the House of Lords debates, and I see few glimmers of what should be core business, which is social justice. In my studies, I have read books across disability theology, queer theology, liberation theology, books addressing race, class, and gender through theological lenses. Across all of these disciplines, the same call comes out loud and clear. Inclusion and equality is a social justice issue. Until we are fully embraced as equal participants in the life of the church, the kingdom of God cannot be experienced as it was designed to be. Jack Woodruff directly addresses this call in his chapter From Young, Woke and Christian. He writes, as a cisgender person, you have an amount of power to advocate for the inclusion of trans people. This is not to ignore other forms of discrimination. Just because you are cisgender does not mean you don't have your own struggle. As a white person, I, Jack, am learning about my own privilege and discerning how I can use this in the fight for racial justice. And through this learning, I am able to take action. So as a cisgender person, you can use your privilege to challenge transphobic narratives and advocate for trans inclusion, both within our churches and in society as a whole. It's really well articulated, and I think it applies across the board with disability, with race, with class, all of the things that we've been talking about. As a disabled person who has spent the last 5 years advocating for disabled people in the church community and on the margins, I am exhausted. We need to understand where our privilege lies and use it to take the burden of advocacy off those already living under the oppression of normative structures. I love the imagery of a choir singing a very long note. In music, we use a technique called staggered breathing, where we take it in turns to break off the note, take a breath, and rejoin the chorus. That way, the note is held for as long as directed, yet none of the musicians keel over for lack of oxygen. We need staggered advocacy, but to do that, we need more advocates. If my siblings in Christ can develop their awareness and practice around safeguarding disabled people, I can rest a while and develop my own awareness around, say, bisexuality and faith, ready to join the choir with renewed vigour, learning and improved practice. If we recognise our equality without denying the specific challenges different demographics face, then we can advocate more effectively and safeguard more efficiently. Inclusion equals safeguarding. A positive, proactive approach to both inclusion of all individuals who come to seek God and to safeguarding said individuals will give us the tools to make our church safe. Seeing both the 80-year-old gentleman who loves to welcome and the 17-year-old queer girl who embodies punk style and wants to know Jesus as equal, beloved children of God, deserving of equal rights and privileges within the church is something that, sadly, in my experience, most institutional churches are far from. But God sees their spirits, entwined with the Holy Spirit, and rejoices in their fellowship. Equally, fully included as they are, let us follow that example. The more I spend time working with people whose pathway to abundant life has been sharply curtailed by those brandishing outdated theology and offering shallow faith, the more I want to shout from the rooftops how things need to change. After all, we all just want the same things: love, respect, empowerment, to become our whole and best selves, beloved and free. Thank you.
Online people, send us your questions. We've got about 6 minutes or so for questions. Questions in the room.
Thank you so much for that talk. This question is actually kind of to all the other speakers as well, as yourself. Just a question for me about, there's a philosopher called Calvin Warren who wrote a great essay called The Politics of Hope, Black Nihilism and the Politics of Hope. And in it, he basically says that we can so easily become captured in discourse and dialogue about the possibility of this undefined imagined future, which is apparently better, but which people haven't really seen. And just thinking about Judith's talk, and there was one of the replies to one of your questions, which was kind of, Trumpian, that, things are happening, plans are underway, there's something happening, we've got this sorted, and it just not being really convincing. And also something which Helen mentioned about, why is it that traditionalist Catholics are, or Helen was asked about, traditionalist Catholics and why they vote a certain way about sexuality. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, do you think that we are trapped in this system where we talk, and what we don't actually do is kind of put a spoke in the wheel of systems? And why is that? And I also, just as another side of that, also a question to all three of you, to what extent do you think what occurred on Friday was enabled by LLF, and was LLF necessary for Friday?
So the first part of the question, I think talking really does have a place. I mean, the fact that the conference we did last year, I do think it makes a difference, because the follow-up that we've had with people from the conference last year, the stories through the ordinary office of people that we've kind of touched base with, and then they've gone off and done their own thing. And I actually think having these conversations and keeping the talking going, it might not be putting a spoke in the wheel, but it's certainly putting pebbles under the wheels and making it feel a bit more bumpy. And I think we really do need to continue doing it. However small the contribution, the activism, the act, whatever we can do, since Dave's death, it's been really difficult for me personally to do a lot. And this is the first sort of thing that I'm really coming out and doing. And but I'm determined I'm not going to stop, because we're not where we need to be. And even if we never get there, it's about the journey as well. The second part of your question about LLF, I absolutely think that LLF played into the appointment. I think, if you'll forgive me, I think, like a lot of us, I'm still processing an awful lot about that, because I was not expecting it. I really, really was not expecting it. And in some ways I'm really pleased, and in some ways I'm really cautious. But yes, in a nutshell, I do think LLF was an integral part of that appointment. But more about that will have to come later.
I want to answer Gerald's question as well about why shouldn't, all this talk, all this money, how much did the 7 days of shared conversations cost the diocese? And what did it achieve, really? And who provided that money? I think the reason that we don't put a spoke in the wheel is because we are the thing that has to be put into the wheel. And at some stage we put our bodies, our reputations. We're talking about incarnate, embodied theology, and it's too costly for us. Last question. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. It's really wonderful. This question is coming off curiosity around the church perceiving diversity, or GSRD, as dangerous, and whether that is because there is a financial danger to the churches of being affirming. In that, there is a certain demographic, the older, the more conservative members of the church, that are the ones who tend to tithe the most consistently. Is there a sacrifice that the church needs to make financially in order to be affirming and to safeguard people appropriately?
That's interesting, because in my experience, so one of my local churches has just come out absolutely firmly, we will not, and I will not even allow somebody else to hold a prayer for blessing service in my church. And there was a lot of people who have actually left, and they were older demographic. So I don't think it's as simple as it's the older demographic. And also, I think there's a lot of, there's all this talk of the quiet revival, and there's a lot of growth in younger people going to conservative evangelical churches. And I think there is the expectation that there will be some financial contribution as well. So I do think that moving into safeguarding affirming spaces and being more inclusive about that does come with the risk of a financial cost, but then how much resource in terms of finances, but also gifts and diverse expressions, the LGBTQIA plus community has so much more to offer. And actually as a musician in church, if you think that there aren't queer people in churches, just look at your organist, just look at your musician. The church actually runs on the gifts of queer people. It really, really does. So I think we need, if we do more embracing, actually, I would hope it will balance out.
We've got one more question from online.
Question from Janet online. You mentioned the CARE Act, and I have been aware that diocesan safeguarding leads are using that definition of vulnerable adult, but adding that they have to be in need of care and support from care services. How can DSOs be required to abandon the CARE Act requirement and instead understand the more nuanced definitions of contextual vulnerabilities which you highlight within the church?
I think it's education. I think it's listening to lived experiences. I also think we have to understand that these things are not solid. So people who may come under the definition, that could be varied. So, for example, I have days when there is no way that I could be sat here. The reason that I'm sat here is because I've done absolutely nothing for 3 days beforehand and will do so at the other end. So these things, when we're looking at block definitions and saying you have to fall under this, that's just not life. And I think we have to understand that, and we have to be, the whole term reasonable adjustments, you have to look at every case individually and say, actually, I recognise that this person needs that. And I think, I will challenge and say that just because you have a definition, you can't hide behind that. You can't say, oh, well, this doesn't fall under, this has happened to me, actually, this doesn't fall under safeguarding because. And it's like, well, actually, when I'm having panic attacks in the garden of a cathedral because I've been triggered by a song that was within all of my abuse within a church, how can you tell me that is not safeguarding? So, yeah, education and understanding that these things are not binary.
Okay, I didn't want to put Louise on the spot, so I checked first. We have a DSO in the room. Louise.
To reply to Janet. So the CARE Act is about support and care needs. The Church of England definition of vulnerable adult is a lot broader. And so dioceses that aren't using that broad definition aren't following the guidance from the Church of England. And so the Church of England guidance is very much around being significantly impaired in your ability to protect yourself. Okay. And I think where there's inconsistency across the country is it comes down to professional judgment.
Yeah.
Because you're looking at definitions of abuse and then you're looking at vulnerability as well.
Yeah.
And just because there's situations where something isn't seen to be a safeguarding concern, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be safeguarding all people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So we need to make that distinction.
Absolutely. And I think another thing to sort of add into the mix is when you've got thinking of the Super Diocese of Leeds, for example, who I believe have a team of 4, whether that's grown or not, I don't know, but in my experience of working with them, and I think actually there is a resource element that people can only do so much, and if you unfortunately are the person who is slightly less of need than another case, for example, then you're the one that's going to be left at the wayside. But yes, the whole point being that if we could all have a proactive approach to safeguarding in the first place, then we wouldn't need.
We write your questions down and we will pass them on to Rebecca or to the we might send them in fact to all the speakers if speakers are happy. I don't know about you, but I am mentally, emotionally already feeling my batteries fading, but there is caffeine outside. We've got a break. When are we due back?
Yeah, so let's come back in 20 minutes. So that would be 3:50. And there's no jugs of water out there, but there is a water fountain. If you go down the stairs and instead of going where the breakfast was, you turn immediately left and then go through the first door on the left, there is a water fountain if you want to fill up your bottle. And there's also in the cafeteria a water station. And I can do a run to the water fountain if anyone needs it. You can give me a bottle. Stay hydrated.